As the jhana interpretation that we give here on this channel goes against the grain of most modern traditions and most modern schools, we frequently get questions on suttas related to that topic. Who would have thought? And one sutta that comes up quite often when we say that jhana is something that happens quite late in the practice is at the occasion where the Buddha, slipped into jhana under the rose apple tree as a child. How could a mere child, at such a young age, seemingly without any prior training, slip into one of the most sublime and refined states of meditation? Today we try to shed some light onto this event. And I want to start this video with a citation so that we are all on the same page. And the Buddha pretty much explained this as follows in Majjhima Nikaya number 100. Would there be another path to awakening? And then it occurred to me. I recall sitting in the cool shade of a black plum tree when my father the Sakyan was off working, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, quite secluded from unskillful qualities. I entered and remained in the first jhana, which has rapture and bliss born of seclusion, while thinking and pondering. And at this occasion, you might notice that various different traditions and various different schools already translate this very differently. Many traditions translate it as while placing the mind and keeping it connected, whatever that means. They're usually not really explaining what they mean. But then again, there are many other schools that translate this in even other ways. And the sutta continues as follows. Could this be the path to awakening? Stemming from that memory came the understanding that is indeed the path to awakening. And then it occurred to me, why am I afraid of that pleasure? For it has nothing to do with sensual pleasures or unskillful qualities. I thought, I'm not afraid of that pleasure, for it has nothing to do with sensual pleasures or unskillful qualities. And this is how the sutta goes. And this brings up some questions that people typically have when it comes to jhana practices or anything related to concentration practices, etc. And this sutta in specific brings forth the question, does this mean that jhana happened before the right view? After all, at that time, the Buddha, to be, was still a bodhisattva. So he did not have the right view. He did not understand the teachings special to the Buddha. He did not understand dependent origination. Yet, he did slip into jhana. Could this be? Am I not saying all the time on this channel here that jhana is the last element of the Noble Eightfold Path? Well, I do say that. And hopefully, at the end of the video, it is much clearer what I mean by that. But there are other questions that come up. For example, was the Buddha absorbed at that time? Because he was a child, right? He was just sitting there under the rose apple tree. His father was off working, and then he pretty much slipped into that state. There's no mentioning of the Buddha performing this or that exercise. Was he performing any method at all? I don't think so. Otherwise, any of the suttas really would mention that. Was he feeling good? Well, probably, because the suttas talk about a kind of pleasure that is not sensual in nature. So what is sensual pleasures? Well, we will probably discuss it a bit later. And wasn't the Buddha later learning the jhanas from other teachers after that? Why did he do that? I mean, as a child, he had access to it. Why does he have to relearn that from people like Brahmaputra? And what is this jhana really? What is it that we are talking about? But let us maybe first start with what jhana is according to many of the modern traditions. And at the beginning, I have to mention that most modern traditions are commentarial in nature. This means that they do not see the suttas in isolation, but try to contextualize the suttas, given the information that has been provided to them by certain commentarial texts, and sometimes by their lineage. And at this time, I would like to challenge anyone, really, that if you would hand any of the suttas, really, maybe even all of them, to a completely new person without such a background in Buddhism or in any background of modern schools or commentarial texts, would they read, for example, any of the absorption style of meditation or any of the absorption methods stuff from the suttas? And if you would honestly access that, I don't think that is the case. I don't think that is possible at all. I still remember quite vividly when I was starting my practice, and I did not have any of that background. I was starting with modern books like everyone else and read maybe 40 or 50 of them. And none of that made sense when I started reading the suttas because I could not find any of the methods or any of the techniques that those modern books mentioned in the suttas. Not even a hint of that. I would have to really bend my mind to make it fit. And I was not willing to do that. So I decided at some point, okay, are the modern traditions right, or are the suttas right? I had to decide, and I went for the suttas at that time. So now we get an idea of what the modern schools oftentimes mean with jhana. More often than not, they see it as a kind of very pleasant state. For example, I do not like name dropping, but Lee Brasing, as an example, displays this kind of jhana as a kind of pleasant abiding here and now, as a kind of pleasure that you attain. All his techniques are even withdrawing a bit from your immediate experience, allowing thoughts to unfold naturally, allowing this or that to happen, allowing the mind voice to die down, and all those other things. And then, when there's a pleasant sensation coming up, you jump in on that pleasant sensation and make it broad and wide and span your entire experience. So this is one kind of jhana. That is, well, okay, I guess. It's not as absorbed as before, as many of the other very old commentarial traditions state, but it's still kind of focused on the pleasure aspect of it. And then we have those very old texts where the people interpret the kind of absorption very narrowly, where you kind of have no thinking at all and are really just zoomed in on one topic and experience the most sublime kind of bliss. And those schools of thought and meditation did exist even at the time of the Buddha. There certainly were people who were practicing like that. Otherwise, the Buddha would not have scolded many of those practitioners by comparing them to blind or deaf people who are just shutting out their senses and as a result, experiencing some kind of relief because the senses are oppressive. But overall, the jhana description, according to the suttas, and this is what I like to go by here on this channel, is a supremely unabsorbed open state of mind. If you go by suttas like Majjhima Nikaya number 111, then you will notice that Sariputta talks about lots of different things that are going on in the jhana that he has attained. And for each of those jhanas, well, there is less going on, no question about it. And especially when you enter the formless absorptions or formless realms, then you certainly cannot do certain things anymore. But in the beginning, in the first jhana as an example, you can do all kinds of things as long as you roughly meet the conditions. And again, I like to interpret jhana as more or less the culmination of the path towards the fruit of stream entry. So what you experience from then on, or what you have access to from then on, is samma samadhi. Samma meaning right, and samadhi meaning concentration. So you have attained concentration of mind. And this is what you are trying to work towards, that the mind gathers in one place, that all the past factors come together, that everything converges upon the practice. And there are lots of good feelings as a byproduct. There's a strong sense of relief. But the pleasure, this kind of pleasant relief, is only a byproduct of that kind of practice. If you look at the suttas, the Buddha always compared it, the kind of pleasure that is attained through the practice, to some kind of relief. He compared it to freedom from the hindrances. He compared it with getting free from a prison house, getting healthy again after having a deadly disease, paying back an immense loan, and all those things, finding your way back through a desert after you have been lost, or something like that. This kind of pleasure is a legit pleasure, but it is not something that you can cultivate over and over again. That is impossible. You would have to get lost again to re-experience some of that relief, as an example. Same with getting healthy again. You would have to willingly move back to a place of sickness so that you can relive the pleasure that you get from no longer being sick. And only a maniac would do that. That is something no sane person ever would do. And this is the kind of pleasure that the suttas are talking about when they talk about the pleasures that have nothing to do with sensuality. Because you cannot recreate them through striving, through craving-related striving. It's not possible. Because once you are healthy, you are healthy. That state is your new normal. And it is a state of insight. It's nothing intellectual, but it is a feeling or dispassion-based state. Wisdom in Buddhism is always connected to dispassion, and this is very important. So if you are not very dispassionate by nature, chances are that very much limits the amount of wisdom that you can attain. And there are a number of suttas, at least in my opinion, that support what I'm trying to say here. The Majjhima Nikaya 111, the one by one sutta, in which Sariputta mentions all those states that he went through one by one, is in my opinion already a counterstatement to the absorption hypothesis. And then there are other suttas. For example, there's a sutta where Maradusi is mocking practitioners to rile them up against each other, where he compares those practitioners to jhana practitioners, where just sitting there, the head is bobbing left and right, they're falling asleep all the time. And he's mocking them for that, for this kind of practice, where they are not master of their senses, where they are not experiencing clearly and brightly. And then there are other suttas. Forgive me for not giving you the numbers. I've done that in one of the older videos, but I do not know them by heart. Then there's another sutta where Buddha says that, for example, the concentration that you attain through walking is long-lasting. So he praises walking meditation as a means to attain jhana. But that's certainly not something that most people can do nowadays when they try to attain jhana. They are sitting down on the cushion, shutting out everything else, and then blissfully focusing on whatever sensations they try to cultivate. And then there's another sutta where the Buddha talks about jhana as his high and luxurious bed. And again, he goes through all the different things that you can do while in jhana. He says, when I am in jhana, my rough hemp ropes or something like that feel divine to me. When I am in jhana, eating the most disgusting kind of coarse food feels divine to me. When I am in jhana, my walking feels divine, my sitting feels divine, my lying down feels divine. Basically, everything that I have to do feels divine. Everything that I still have to do in the sensual domain feels divine because of the mind in jhana. And now, if you go back to the commentarial texts or traditions, people usually say, yeah, that's all right, but what is described in the sutta is obviously what happens after you leave jhana, and then you can walk around again. So they obviously notice that the sutta is talking about a jhana that is not really attained while sitting. I mean, you can also attain it while sitting, but that's not the point. The freedom from the hindrances, the freedom from the sensual domain, or any sensual kind of craving, is not tied to any posture, because craving is an attitude that you have toward the entirety of your experience. And only when that is abandoned can jhana arise, at least temporarily. I mean, the abandonment of the jhanas is not something that is permanent. You're free from the hindrances only for a time, so they can come back. But at least for that time, you have to be free from sensuality. And no person without countless prior assumptions would, reading the suttas alone, come up with any of the absorption techniques. I'm absolutely certain about it. You have to rely on modern schools and commentarial traditions and all the interpretations that people did in the past to even come close to any of those interpretations. And I want to keep that in your minds so that you can think about that maybe for a bit. And again, all of this here, what I've presented thus far, means that the jhana that the Buddha explained is more akin to a quasi-permanent change in perspective, a quasi-permanent change in lifestyle that you undergo when you have reached a certain point in your practice. So it is a change in lifestyle away from craving and sensuality, where sensuality is no longer the centerpiece of your experience, and you have accepted that, okay, there's nothing to get there. And as a result, the mind cools down from it. You grow dispassionate towards sensuality more and more. Again, as a stream enterer, you will not be perfectly dispassionate or something like that. There's still a lot of craving left, but the root of craving has been abandoned. So yeah, what do you need for this kind of jhana, for this lifestyle kind of jhana to arise? Well, first of all, you need the freedom from the hindrances. The hindrances are a very deep, underlying coloring of the mind, is what I would like to say. So your experience as a person who is likely not trained to that degree will be an experience that is affected by the hindrances, that is affected by sensual craving at pretty much all times. So you have to be free from that. You have to overcome this freedom. You have to overcome those shackles of sensuality. You have to view sensuality as something bad and harmful, actually. You want to see the danger in it. Whenever the Buddha talked to someone and guided them towards the fruit of stream entry in the suttas, he pretty much gave them talks about how nice the heavens are, how perilous and dangerous sensuality is, and he gladdened their minds. And only once the mind was very glad and they really saw sensuality as something dangerous was the mind ready, and the Buddha noticed that, to give them the teachings that are special to the Buddha. But that requires us to see that there truly is nothing when it comes to sensuality. That sensuality is empty, and ultimately that there's no value in it. And what is sensuality? And I find this quite important because sometimes you can overshoot the mark. Sensuality just means any kind of craving for anything that you experience through the senses, or that is connected with the sensual domain. That is what your sensuality is. Any kind of sensual craving. Not all cravings, but the sensual ones. And that has to go. Otherwise, you would always seek for a solution to your problems in the sensual domain and would not be open to any solution that lies outside. And the Buddha Dhamma lies outside of it. Yet you still experience some pleasure for giving up that sensuality. But you also have to make sure that you are sufficiently alone, sufficiently secluded, your environment has to be sufficiently quiet, and you have to be kind of, not asocial, but unsocial at that time. So you cannot really speak. And there should not be the option to speak around you either. That makes jhana quite difficult, because you can just think a bit. How has your experience changed when you have been alone in the woods taking a walk, as opposed to in a group? There's always the opportunity that you could grab to just speak at any given time. But when you are alone, that is not possible. So yeah. But given all of this, how could the Buddha just slip into any kind of jhana? This is also something that comes up quite often when it comes to the rose apple tree. First, I would say that this example of someone's mind slipping into jhana is kind of already some evidence that the Buddha was not performing any kind of magical technique or anything like that to enter that state. Yet that said, he also did not have the lifestyle that is so pure that I explain as a precondition. Yet he was a child still, and he was not having all his harems and his 3 palaces and everything like that. So he was still fairly close to the lifestyle of his past lives, I would say, where he was cultivating the different meditations for, I think the Suttas mentioned at least 500 lifetimes on end. And in basically all his lives since he decided that he will become the Buddha to be, he cultivated some noble qualities to move closer to becoming a Buddha at one point in his life. And at all times, at that time, his mind was glad. His mind was free from immediate wantings. He was alone because his father was doing off some work. So he was alone, and then he was missing nothing at all. And his mind slipped into jhana, and there's the joy and happiness and blissfulness of not wanting anything at all. In the end, that is what we want from our sensuality. No longer wanting anything. We eat the chocolate because we no longer want the chocolate. We want the wanting for chocolate to go away, if that makes sense. I mean, this is kind of difficult to talk about this. But all our sensual striving is only there so that our urges go away. We want our urges to be gone. This is a reward that we expect from sensuality, making us even more dependent on the same sensuality in the process, which is quite obvious when you talk about sensuality in terms of drugs. But people tend to make an artificial difference between drugs and everything else, even though it follows the very same principle. There is just sensuality and our addiction to it, and no drugs on this end of the spectrum, and then everything else. It is just all sensuality, and there's no difference between this kind of sensuality behavior or that. It is just that some kinds of sensuality have immediate harmful consequences when it comes to our body, but overall, craving is always something that is very unhealthy. Yeah. Anyway, in the end, jhana is the culmination of the practice, cultivated oftentimes at least over years, and only really reached then. So most people require years before they can enter a state of sama samadhi. And even then, it's not really that you have to perform a little dance to enter this kind of state on the meditation cushion. It is something that the mind will naturally start inclining towards as soon as the external conditions are met, as soon as you are alone and secluded and apart from the hindrances. And if you have been living a very busy lifestyle, it's very likely that it will take a while for the animal that is your mind to calm down again. It is a lifestyle, as you have to give up the value of sensuality. That, in turn, will allow you to access jhana, or which will lead to your mind naturally inclining towards jhana. It is not something that you do, which is very important. It is a result. Sama samadhi is something that happens, so to speak, and not something that is a result of your doing. It can never be the result of your doing. And as such, all the recipe approaches must kind of be wrong. And in essence, all sensual craving is abandoned for a time, and not just some craving. People often report that they have lost interest after their jhana practice in grosser kinds of sensuality. They are no longer looking for video games or drugs or food items or this or that. This is all nice. I mean, it's good that people have lost interest in it. And from a conventional perspective, it is really something worth striving for. But in the end, we want to give up all sensual cravings, not some of it at a time, so to speak. And this is kind of akin to saying that a person who started taking cocaine has lost interest in all inferior drugs. A person who is addicted to some very lofty and high kind of pleasure does indeed lose interest in anything that is inferior. But it is still sensuality, and it is still not the pleasure that the Buddha was talking about in the suttas. Would you say that a person who is addicted to heroin or cocaine, quite literally to injecting cocaine, which is something that you can do if you're very addicted, would you say that such a person is free because they no longer crave watching TV or drinking alcohol or cigarettes or even in social relationships? Obviously not. In this example, it becomes quite clear. But when a person talks about lofty meditative states that feel quite pleasant, that they repeat over and over and over again, then it seems like a meditative attainment to many people, while in reality it is not. They are going every day towards the meditation cushion to repeat that pleasant state. Well, what the Buddha talked about is a state that you do not have to reproduce. Healthiness. How could you reproduce healthiness without getting sick again and again and again? It is a wide and open state. And this kind of wide and open state, the abandonment that you go through, the letting go that you go through when it comes to sensuality, kind of equals an equanimous, non-absorbed state. When there is nothing that pulls you, your attention, you give attention to pretty much everything at once. This is how I like to think about it. You no longer single out certain things. If your mind no longer zooms in on certain things, as in the exact opposite of being absorbed, then you come closer and closer to jhana. And this is, by the way, the entirety of the practice that you undergo until then. You abandon craving after craving after craving. First through restraint, or well, even before that through following rules, and you unabsorb yourself from all the different things in the entire world. You abandon your craving for food. You abandon your craving for sleeping. You abandon your craving for entertainment. You abandon your craving for sexuality, for social interactions. You abandon all those cravings. And all those things have in common that they have previously pulled you in. They have absorbed you. Whenever you encountered such a triggering experience, it automatically led to your mind singling that part of experience out, zooming in on that part. And everything that you do in the practice that leads up to jhana means that you stop that you decondition all those aspects of your experience, that you no longer zoom in automatically, that you no longer zoom in on anything at all, no longer single out anything at all. And then we have all the modern schools of meditations that say, yeah, all of this is quite nice. You do indeed train like that. You overcome all those different kinds of craving, keep those rules, stick to the precepts and everything, and unabsorb yourself. But then when the time is right, then you absorb yourself in this special experience that leads to the magical awakening that the Buddha was prescribing. And I think the contradiction here should be quite clear. And nowadays, we are not as pure as child Buddha was. We basically have no tradition of samadhi in the West. There are no people walking around the streets, living like hermits, that want nothing at all, that just go around begging for food or something like that. There's no such thing as people who cultivate non-sensuality. At least it is very, very rare, and most of those people, if they exist, have a religious background. So for those kinds of people of the West, there is no natural samadhi, and we usually cultivate wisdom first, and then samadhi through a very targeted development. So once we have attained the right view, then we know what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. Then we know craving for what it is and can decondition it, uproot it in a very targeted manner. And for us Westerners, the path usually starts with the right view and ends with samadhi. And that is precisely what the Buddha said in, for example, Majjhima Nikaya number 117, where the Buddha repeats a good 40 times that a right view comes first. And that there are different kinds of right view, no question about it. But overall, right view comes first, no matter at what stage of your practice you are. And back in the days, people did attain the right view after the 4 jhanas many times, which is highly unlikely today, I would say. Today, it is much more common and it's much more realistic that you attain jhana very late down the line. It is very likely that you first attain stream entry, or at least the right view, and not the fruit of stream entry, And then, at some point later down the line, possibly years, you can attain jhana and sammasamadhi and with the fruit of stream entry. But I think that is enough, and I hope I have not sparked too much controversy. If you disagree with me, that is perfectly fine, but I do not want to get into lengthy discussions in the comments. If you want to know something or want me to go into more detail on any of those points, feel free to let me know. And now, let us have a look at the most important points. Well, first, this is no longer working without a green screen. But anyway, I will not record the video again. First, people see child Buddha as a contradiction to the later or the lifestyle jhanas, I would say. The Buddha was basically a born saint, and he was cultivating virtue and samadhi for a very long time, I would say. So him being able to slip into such a state is something that it's okay. And when he, what he was lacking at that time was the right view. He wasn't lacking the knowing of what to do to finish the job. You can be free from sensuality, but ultimately you are not free from craving. You are free from, when you are free from sensuality, you are free from sensual craving. So he needed additional knowledge, he needed additional wisdom. And he did drop the upadana of sensuality, of lust, at the age of 29. And I would say at least that he dropped the upadana of hate at the age of 35, when he attained the right view, when he gave up asceticism. He no longer saw any value in pain. Such, his mind became ready to further practice samadhi, because the amount of wisdom that you can attain is directly proportional to the amount of dispassion that you have cultivated. So if you have not cultivated supreme levels of dispassion, then your wisdom will be limited by that. Again, wisdom is more or less the realization of your healthiness after you have abandoned the unhealthiness from before. So this is what we have been aiming for. And as we do not have good virtue nowadays, very likely, and we have not really samadhi also, because samadhi kind of relies on virtue, we have to start cultivating the right view first, and then the mind can incline towards jhana. But anyway, this should be enough for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments below. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.